Welcome to or welcome back to Wrong Sports, and most college football fans, heck, probably all college football fans, know the name of Knute Rockne, the man that built Notre Dame into the brand they are today, and the man that helped to make college football a huge nationwide success, even though he died almost 100 years ago. But just after he claimed a national title and his third undefeated season in his first 6 seasons at Notre Dame, he was heavily courted by several schools to help turn around struggling football teams. One of Notre Dame's most well-known rivals, USC, thought they had Knute Rockne as their next coach in 1925, and were so close that it took legal action and many apologies to keep Knute at Notre Dame. But before I get into this story and everything that happened with Knute Rockne, make sure as always you subscribe to the channel below if you are not already, and please ring that bell so you get updates on brand new videos that I will be dropping in the future. Please check out my Patreon as well, patreon.com/wrongsports. I will be putting up exclusive content. I already have some exclusive content up there already, so make sure you check that out if you haven't yet. And one final thing, like and share this channel with other college sports fans. So if you are watching college football, you probably know the whole story of Knute Rockne, but I'm going to give you the story up to 1925. He played at Notre Dame from 1910 to 1913, mostly as an end, and helped Notre Dame beat Army in 1913 for their first big program win, and that was the win that really put them on the map to start. After he graduated, he would continue his work at Notre Dame in sciences and also be an assistant coach under his former head coach, Jesse Harper, from 1914 to 1917. When Harper elected to retire and go back to Kansas, Knute Rockne was chosen as his replacement, and he would immediately see success as he went undefeated in 1919 and 1920 with his All-American George Gipp, then went 27-3 over the next 3 seasons, building his next great team with the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame in the 1924 season, which would be Notre Dame's finest up to that point, as they destroyed their regular season and was invited to the Rose Bowl after winning that 27-10 and claiming their first national title. Rockne and his wife Bonnie would stay in Southern California for another trip with an ulterior motive. I'll get back to the trip in a moment, but there's more to go into regarding Notre Dame's Rose Bowl trip on New Year's Day 1925. First was that this trip to LA was Notre Dame's first trip to a bowl game and their first trip to California. They had played other California schools, but they came to Notre Dame instead. And this was a big deal, as many Eastern schools like Penn and Harvard and Cornell didn't want to accept invites to the Rose Bowl, and also California with their wonder teams at this point really didn't want to accept to go to the Rose Bowl either. So Stanford luckily was undefeated, went to that Rose Bowl game so it could be conceived as a national championship game for Notre Dame. So there are a couple of reasons why schools back in the 1920s and 30s didn't want to accept bowl games, or it was tough for them to accept bowl games. The number one issue was travel, as this was still the 1920s, so the only way to get across the country was train travel, and that took a while, and it also cost a lot of money. But another reason why was eligibility. That was because bowl games were not considered college football games, so players would have to put their eligibility on the line to play the game. So a lot of times if you were a senior, you didn't mind playing in a bowl game because you were a senior. You had no more eligibility left. Notre Dame had gone through some eligibility issues, and I mentioned this a lot in my video where I talked all about why Notre Dame isn't in the Big Ten. If you haven't checked that out yet, I'll put a link below, also in the upper right-hand corner, so you can click on that. But with eligibility concerns, there was also concerns about their head coach Knute Rockne leaving, and by agreeing to send the team to Los Angeles, it might make him a little happier. You might think that this is crazy, but at this point, with all Knute was doing for the team and for the school, he was looking for a more lucrative offer. Notre Dame had Rockne under a 10-year contract for $10,000 a year. That makes up to about $178,000 in 2024 money. And he signed that no more than a year before the 1924 season, so he was under contract until about 1933 or so. Notre Dame needed to make this deal because Knute Rockne had other overtures from schools in previous years, as Northwestern, Iowa, and even Carnegie Tech, after the 1921 and 22 seasons, inquired about signing Rockne to come to their school to be football coach. A lot of famous coaches were moving around a lot. Example being Shaughnessy, who was at about 7 different schools, or the legendary Pop Warner, who had coached that 1924 Stanford team, and at this point Pop Warner had been at Georgia, Iowa State, Cornell twice, Carlisle twice, Pittsburgh before he landed at Stanford, and he would go to 2 more schools after that. So, like I said, a lot of these guys were moving around. Also, Notre Dame thought that signing that 10-year contract with Knute Rockne would stop all these other offers, and also the contract gave them a legal back pocket in case something did happen, and more on that in a little bit. So with Notre Dame heading to LA for the new year of 1925, USC figured that they would try and coax Knute Rockne away from the Irish. The Notre Dame team, along with some administration and family, specifically Knute Rockne's wife, Bonnie Rockne, boarded a train right after Christmas for a 3-week-long trip. The trip would of course have the game first, then the group would tour LA, which wasn't nearly as glitzy and glamorous as now, but it was still very much glitzier and glamorous than South Bend, Indiana was at this point. The finale of LA would be a first-class dinner dance at the Hotel Biltmore, which provided the players with a huge party to celebrate their great season and a great capper to the trip. The next morning, the Notre Dame party would board a train to continue their trip to San Francisco, except Knute Rockne and his wife Bonnie weren't going to be on board for that. Instead, the Rocknes would stay behind for some relaxation, which was made as a concession to Bonnie Rockne, who complained to Notre Dame about the nervousness and pressure that Knute was under in the years previous, and hoped that a trip to sunny California in the winter would help him relax a little bit. After the rest and relaxation, Knute Rockne would go and meet with USC. I'll get to that in just a moment, but USC's football team was coming off of a season filled with embarrassments. In the 1924 season, they had a 5th consecutive loss to the University of California. Their athletic relations with California and Stanford were broken over allegations of Southern California using ineligible players, which I went over in my series all about the original Pacific Coast Conference. I will put a link above for that and below in the description. Because of those allegations, the Stanford game was canceled, so USC had to schedule St. Mary's, coached by a former Notre Dame star in Slip Madigan, who USC would lose to, so they got embarrassed even more. And the first 6 seasons that Knute Rockne was at Notre Dame, USC had gone 45-7, which is really good, but they had 2 perfect seasons ruined by Cal, and the USC officials were looking for a change and looking to hire the most well-known coach to help them get to the Rose Bowl and get to the top of West Coast football. USC would have to do a lot to get Knute Rockne to LA, but they had a big thing going for them, and that was Bonnie Rockne, who had fallen in love with Southern California. The weather, of course, was kinder in LA than in South Bend. There was endless outdoor activities for her and the children, and just an overall sunny and relaxing atmosphere that they could get year-round. And this was going to be more of a retirement area for her and Knute Rockne to be at once he would retire. The benefits for Knute, who was now a celebrity in South Bend and pretty much all over the country, he could be around more movie stars and other notables in LA, and that had a certain appeal to him now and his after-football life. The biggest plus for Knute Rockne to go to USC was the fact that USC had just built the LA Memorial Coliseum. It had columns, arches mimicking the Roman namesake, and its field was huge, surrounded by nearly 76,000 bleacher seats, which obviously blew away the Rocknes. And this was a huge deal since Notre Dame was still playing at Cartier Field, which held maybe 15,000 people comfortably, and Knute was talking and mostly arguing with Notre Dame officials about constructing a new bigger stadium for the sports at the school, and in LA he didn't have to do any of that work. The meeting went well as Southern California officials were willing to meet with a number of conditions and make Rockne a relatively wealthy man. This was vastly different from some of the other schools who have approached him earlier. Like I mentioned, Northwestern, Iowa, and Carnegie Tech had approached Knute Rockne between 1921 and 1922, somewhere in that area, but none really got past the initial stage, as most were just looking to see if Rockne was willing to leave the Irish. Knute would tell USC his parameters for signing and would enjoy the rest of the trip with his wife and also get to figure out if he could or would be able to get out of his deal with Notre Dame. The trip for the Rocknes was over and they got back to South Bend on or around January 15, 1925. And when they got back, they learned that the Southern California comptroller wired Rockne that all of his conditions had been met. But that agreement soon went away once news of the offer made the Los Angeles papers, and then made it all across the country. This was not good, as Rockne had not had the time to meet with the president of Notre Dame, Father Walsh, and attempt to get out of his long-term Notre Dame contract. Father Walsh found out about the offer from the newspaper reports and threatened legal action if it proceeded. USC officials apologized for the leaked story, but they didn't take back its desire to sign Knute. In the end, though, Father Walsh's bluff worked to scuttle this deal, as Knute feared legal action against his own alma mater and told Southern Cal that he regretted the whole incident, since it might have put him in a negative light with some important Notre Dame alumni. I'm not sure of the USC offer to Rockne, but it would have given him double his salary at least that he had at Notre Dame, so at least $20,000, and made him the head of athletics at USC, which would have been a job that Knute Rockne would have had until he didn't want it anymore. With Rockne walking away from USC, that would start a chain reaction, as he would suggest that USC talk with Howard Jones, the former Iowa coach who left the school after 1922 due to a contract dispute. And Rockne was fond of Howard Jones after Notre Dame had lost to Iowa in 1921 after 2 undefeated seasons, and knew that Jones was looking to coach somewhere new and somewhere else since his wife was not fond of the Midwest anymore. USC quickly jumped to sign Howard Jones, and he would coach for 16 years, bringing USC numerous undefeated seasons, Rose Bowls, and national titles, and pretty much put USC football on the map. Along with that recommendation of Jones, USC agreed to an annual series with Notre Dame starting in 1926, so Knute's wife Bonnie would still be able to get her winter trip to LA, and Knute could continue the Notre Dame football tour all around the country, which is really all he ever wanted to do. But that wouldn't be the final time that another school would want to sign Knute Rockne. As the 1925 season was ending and Notre Dame finished to an unusual 7-2-1 record, Columbia University in New York had started talking with Knute Rockne. Obviously, Knute Rockne was not new to New York City, as he had taken the Irish football team there a few times for games versus Army and was loved by the Irish in the city. Columbia had not had any success up to this point and were often being beaten by the more prestigious Ivy League teams like Penn, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So Columbia was looking for a change, and they quickly made an offer to Rockne by December 1st. The deal was a 3-year contract worth $15,000 a year. Now, if you believe Columbia, Rockne did not mention during the negotiations that he was still under contract with Notre Dame until at least 1933 or so. This gave Rockne time to think about the offer, which was something that he didn't have after the USC tour. The news didn't get out, which made Columbia look better in Rockne's eyes, but he couldn't get out of the Notre Dame deal still. This was probably due to the legal threats again. Rockne would apparently write to Columbia to tell them he wouldn't be coming to the school, but the school either didn't get it or didn't want to see it, as Columbia's athletic board met on Friday, December 11th to approve Rockne's contract and proudly announced that they were hiring him. That didn't last long, though, because as soon as Rockne saw this news, he called Father Walsh to tell them he wasn't leaving and he would head to New York City to straighten it out. Rockne happened to be in Philadelphia when he saw this news due to some of the Four Horsemen playing in a game there, so he would quickly get to New York City to adamantly tell Columbia that he was still under contract with Notre Dame and he would not be leaving. Columbia knew that there was nothing that they could do that wouldn't make Rockne matter, so they withdrew their offer. Columbia would end up finding a great coach in Lou Little in 1930, who would bring them to the Rose Bowl in 1933, so it worked out for them too a little bit. And the offers apparently didn't stop to Knute Rockne all the way up to his death in 1931. Just none of those offers got to the point of USC or Columbia's deal. But tell me what you think. Do you think Knute Rockne would have ever left Notre Dame to go to another school, of course, if he hadn't died in 1931? Tell me in the comments below. Also, make sure, if you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you get updates on brand new videos, and check out my Patreon, patreon.com/wrongsports for exclusive content.